Yeah. Yeah. Go. Go. Yeah. 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 Go. Go. Yeah. Go. Let's go. 4. Arrows up. Yeah. Yeah. Go. Go. Yeah. Go. Let's go. 4.
Columbus was the major supplier of American slaves prior to 1500. As noted earlier, he caused some 3,000 to perhaps 6,000 slaves to be sent to Europe. And also, if we are to believe that his plans were implemented to the Azores, Canary Islands, Madeira, and Cabo Verde Islands. Again, Cabo Verde Islands. Wait. Says here, a general view of Dorchester Avenue, Dorchester, Massachusetts. This is from 1930. It's incredible, guys, because, I reminisce. I walked through this very same street many times. I grew up in Dorchester. I grew up in Boston. I went there when I was 5 years old. And I met many different people, many different cultures, many people from different nations. It made me the person I am today. I would have definitely been different if I grew up in Costa Rica only. Since we're talking about Dottie, yeah. Pakika, yeah. I used to have that accent. I'm losing it. Puritans began settling in Dorchester in 1630, right? So-called Puritans. Remember my Puritans video, Cryptos. Many of them coming from Dorchester, England, which inspired the town's name. Their first houses, any fort, were built in the Savin Hill area. I know that area. Along what would become Pleasant Street, later settlements developed in what is now Phil's Corner and Mattapan Square. All right, so Phil's Corner, I chilled that a lot. From Phil's Corner, Geneva Avenue, Bowden Street. So I'd go through Mattapan a lot, coming from Dorchester. on the green trolley. So everybody from Boston know what I'm talking about. New immigrant groups began to migrate more steadily into the Boston area following the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which facilitated migration by dissolving discriminatory quotas. Dorchester became a key receiving area for groups such as Haitians. All right, I grew up with a lot of Haitians as well, Cape Verdeans, West Indians, Dominicans, and Vietnamese. All right, can't forget about my Vietnamese friends, childhood friends. I was in a soccer team over there, and we were this lineup right here, as it says, Haitians, Cape Verdeans, West Indians, Dominicans, Vietnamese, and I was from Costa Rica, so we were all from different countries. That was Dorchester. But of course, one of the biggest so-called minority out of all these people was the Cape Verdeans. I grew up with a lot of Cape Verdeans guys. Teammates, classmates, best friends, many very close, almost like family. I grew up kind of going to their family parties. And trust me, they had big parties, Cape Verdeans. They reminded me a lot of Costa Ricans and people I know, Latin Americans. Very different than the West Africans I would encounter, like Nigerians or people from Ghana or the Congo region, They were more like us, the Cape Verdeans. I was around them so much that the elders, the Cape Verdean elders will ask me, whose son are you? Fiji Ken. Yeah, me, Mr. Puppy Criollo. Obi kuseke mi fra, mi papi Criollo. Yeah, so I grew up and, I learned a little bit of the language, and at least I could understand a lot of it, most of it. What I'm trying to say is, this is not just any video. Just want to make sure, any Cape Verdean that sees this knows that I'm not just doing this video from the outside. Also been in the inside, the Cape Verdean community, which I respect very much. I'm hoping with this video that I can show maybe something you never knew about in the history of Cape Verde and its people, maybe not thought about it this way. They always had us thinking out of Africa, one way. We know America's the true old world. If you're new to my channel, please catch up. So they've been telling us everything in reverse. You gotta understand who was in Cape Verde before they started grabbing people from Cape Verde. Who were they really bringing to Cape Verde? There's a real history and there's a false narrative. We're gonna touch on, many topics from before, because it all relates to what we're gonna be talking about today. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. During this presentation, I'm going to be mentioning the Wampanoag a lot, or other tribes. When it comes to whaling, who were the first people really whaling, hunting whales? Who taught who how to whale? It was actually American Indians. They were the first ones. And I just wanted to show, these are, Wampanoag right here, as you can see. This is Emma Mitchell Safford of Ipswich, direct descendant of Massasoit, Chief Massasoit. This is Sylvia Gold Mitchell, all right? They're related. Sylvia Gold Mitchell again. Right in the face, Ambrose Pels, the Mashpee Wampanoag. Rachel Diamond Ryan. Mary Eliza Butler, Wampanoag, Montauk. Mabel Pugnett Avant, Wampanoag, circa 1940. Dorcas Honorable in later years. She was called the last Wampanoag of Nantucket. All right. They always say the last Indian died. All right. Take a good look. This was the Cisco family and others, circa 1930, Wampanoag Reservation near Worcester. I have a colorized version of this. I'm going to show it to you now. So here we have more Wampanoag, Love Madison Prince, Chappaquiddick Wampanoag, Herbert Benjamin Hillis, Mashpee Indian. Okay. Here we got Betsy J. Oakley, Ataquin. All right. Wampanoag Mashpee Band. You see that? Here we got Gertrude West Ams, Chappaquiddick Wampanoag. We got Ambrose Pels, Mashpee Wampanoag right here. Okay, just wanted to show you guys this. This is Anna Handy Fontes, Wampanoag. From left to right, we got Delsena Mills, Dorothy Helm, and Anna Helm attending powwow. Wampanoag people. Okay, now here we are in the Patchogue Medford Library digital archives online. And what I found here says John Horton, last of the Montauk Indian whalers, at his home in Freetown. All right, very important. we're going to get into the history of whaling. I'm going to show you how important it was to the American Indians here in the Northeast, and as well how important it was to Cape Verdeans. So before we even start talking about American Indians or whalers, just want you guys to see who they're talking about. Of course, this image is not good quality. I was able to colorize it and zoom in. I'll show you guys. But this is who they're saying is the last Montauk Indian is always the last Indian dying to keep. But what they're really doing is reclassifying you into so-called Black, Negro, African American. You think I'm making this up? This is in wikiwand.com. It says Julia and John Horn, the last Montauk whaler. All right, a whaler. Again, another angle, same people, black and white picture. And here is a close-up, right? What do you see there? Do you remember who you are? Montauk Indians and a whaler. Could he have gone to Cape Verde in his whaling expeditions? Most likely. There's a long history of that. I'm going to show you guys. In another angle, which you guys can see, that is them right there in their home. All right, zoomed in. What do you see? Copper-colored tribes of America, Montauk Indians. All right, so we're going to begin the presentation. We're going to be talking about first the American Indian slavery, and then head into Sephardic Jews being sent into Cape Verde, both groups. As you guys saw, many Indians I just showed. Don't picture only one type of so-called Indian. This is a Montauk indigenous couple right here in front of you. And he was a whaler. We're going to start out reading from the book Africans and Native Americans by Jack Forbes. We're going to get it like it's the first time and remember what he has told us already and what we can prove when it comes to primary sources. Who was really getting enslaved and where were they being sent to?
Columbus was the major supplier of American slaves prior to 1500. As noted earlier, he caused some 3,000 to perhaps 6,000 slaves to be sent to Europe, and also, if we are to believe that his plans were implemented to the Azores, Canary, Madeira, and Cabo Verde Islands. By the year 1500, however, a great escalation began in the shipment of Americans across the Atlantic, since other Spaniards and the Portuguese became directly active. In the year 1500, Americans were directly transported to Europe from the Caribbean islands, from the coast of South America, and from the Terra Nova, Newfoundland region. That's up there in Canada. 3 major new sources of slaves were thus opened up, and it is necessary to examine this subject before proceeding to an analysis of what happened to the Americans when they arrived in eastern lands. Says thus Columbus, according to Las Casas, was determined to consume the entire population of Haiti by filling every ship with slaves to be sold in the Canary, Azores, and Cabo Verde Islands, or wherever, and planned that these slaves would finance the conquest. Thus, even as Columbus was loading 5 ships with slaves, he was proposing to sell 4,000 in various parts of the Mediterranean and along the coast of Africa. Where? Africa. Who's over there? From one slave market to another, and ended up in these places like Cabo Verde. Cabo Verde was a big slave port, and supposedly a big slave port of where the transatlantic slave trade started. So you see who was over there actually getting sold, right? The shipment of Americans to Europe and Africa by Columbus and by other Spaniards. Again, the shipment of Americans to Europe and Africa by Columbus, the other way around, reverse, flip the game on you, and by other Spaniards, was then not an accident, nor was it a result of armed resistance or alleged cannibalism. Those were all lies, you see? They're all lies. They were alleged cannibalism, alleged. It was a direct extension of the style of commercial slavery long practiced by the Genoese and Venetians in the Mediterranean and used by the Portuguese along the west coast of Africa. It says here, in any case, Chief Martin of the Carijo nation complained to the Spanish in 1576 that the Portuguese of southern Brazil were carrying their children off to other parts of Brazil and then to Portugal to to be sold as slaves. A Jesuit witnessed in 1635 a slave raid using 15 seagoing ships and many large canoes designed reportedly to secure 12,000 slaves from the Carijo nation. 12,000 slaves. One must suppose that many were to be secured for sale outside of Brazil. We can, I think, be confident that the Americans soon appeared in the Portuguese colonies in Africa and in the Cabo Verde Islands. Cabo Verde Islands. The high death rates on Portuguese sailing vessels of the period would make necessary for replenishing of crews in Brazil, and a somewhat later date, the use of the Brazilian natives and mixed bloods in the African trade in various capacities.
After 1650, Angola was virtually a colony of Brazil, and we can be sure that many persons of American ancestry went there, all right? 1650, Angola was virtually a colony of Brazil. It was a colony of Brazil, not the other way around, people. In addition to the normal kinds of contact, Angola was used as a place for sending Americans and other persons who proved troublesome in Brazil. So they were sending rebel Indians, you know, those who were fighting back the Portuguese and Spanish and the Jesuits and all these Christians that were going over there to enslave them and you know, take their things, invade their country, take their land. So they would send all these rebel Indians over to Angola, all right, the troublesome ones, all right. In Ceará, for example, mixed blood and American undesirables were periodically rounded up and shipped off to Angola. 1720s onwards, all right? 1720s, they're supposed to be coming from that side. No, after about 1740, the island of Fernão de Noronha was also used as a dumping ground for such people, all right? This island off the coast of Brazil. In the south of Brazil, Americans and other non-whites were deported to Angola for gold smuggling or for using a route passing through a region exposed to attack by pre-Americans forces in 1720s.
It says here, from the 1590s onward, Dutch warships frequently captured Spanish and Portuguese vessels, many of which were loaded with slaves or possessed crew members of non-white race. So we're talking about the American Indians they were grabbing, right? The Spanish and the Portuguese, as we just read all the accounts. Some of these slaves were taken to Europe, while others were sold to the English in Virginia. All right, here we go. We're starting to get to America now. Or were sent to Dutch ports in the Americas, New Amsterdam, Curaçao, for example. Amsterdam up there in New York. We know that some of the captives were persons with Spanish Christian names and were not new slaves from Africa. So they're telling us straight up that they were not Africans. Okay, you're hearing that, right? They weren't African. You already read all the accounts. Now we gotta, you know, the lies that the Americans saying they were grabbing, or these English were grabbing Negroes from the Spanish ships that were coming from Africa, but they weren't. So you can say here they had Christian names, were not new slaves from Africa. In fact, some of those who arrived in Virginia were Carib people. They were Carib people, as the so-called first slaver, John Hawkins. Let's talk about him real quick. The second son of William Hawkins, another slave trader before him. He was actually going to Brazil, South America. West County merchant trader says here, John Hawkins was born at Plymouth. As a youth, he made a number of voyages to the Spanish-held Canary Islands, where he first learned the profits to be made from selling, quotes, African slave, close quotes, in Spain's American colonies. In 1559, he married Catherine Gonson, the daughter of the treasurer of Queen Elizabeth's navy. Gonson and his friend helped supply Hawkins with 3 ships for his first slaving voyage in 1562. Now let's remember that, you know, there's accounts of Spanish and Portuguese, right, slaving Native Americans up as early as 1493 until way into 1562. All right, so especially in the 1500s, 1501, 52, they were really taking them, right, from Hispaniola, from Terra Nova, Newfoundland, and from the coast of Brazil, right? So by 1562, damage had already been done, right? So who was in West Africa by that time in 1562? We already know, we read all these accounts, that it was a lot of Native Americans because these islands were uninhabited. Remember? especially those in the coast, like Cape Verde. Now remember that. So this first slaver, right? He was supplied 3 ships, and this was in 1562. Now I'm going to read to you where exactly he got these first so-called Negroes for his first slaving voyage. John Hawkins, cousin of Sir Francis Drake, conceived the idea of selling slaves to Spanish colonists, despite the Spanish embargo on trade with non-Spaniards. Hawkins picked up a cargo of Negroes on the African coast and successfully peddled them in Spanish America, thereby becoming England's first slaver. For this feat, Captain Hawkins became an instant hero at home. Now, from the books of the historic voyages gathered by the Halliock Society, and from books that were printed in 1611, we get this account of John Hawkins. John Hawkins' first voyage to the West Indies, it actually tells us where he got these so-called Negroes from, and what part of West Coast Africa, right? So after the statement made that he grabs 300 or so-called Negroes from the coast of Guinea, on the footnote on that statement, it tells us that he was much aggravated, Mr. Hawkins, at the information given by the Minions people to certain Negro tribes near Cape Verde, of nature very gentle and loving, whom he was attempting to kidnap. So basically, he kidnapped from Cape Verde. I'm reading from the book now called Columbus and Other Cannibals, the Wetico Disease of Exploitation. And it says here, after learning of the reported existence of so-called Carib people who allegedly ate human flesh, Columbus developed plans for their large-scale enslavement. The Caribs, after correction, would be better than any other slaves whatsoever. Again, remember, Columbus said that they would make perfect slaves. On January 30, 1494, Columbus proposed to the Spanish crown that the enslavement of Americans would pay for the cost of the conquest. Colon and his compatriots first began to enslave Taino, Arawak people who were neither cannibalistic nor warlike. All right, they weren't even cannibalistic. Lacaze's notes, he will finish in very short time consuming all the people of this island, Haiti, because he was determined to load the ships which would go to the Castile with slaves and to send them to sell to the Canary and Azores and Cabo Verde Islands. Again, Cabo Verde Islands. This is before John Hawkins arrived to Cabo Verde to kidnap the so-called Negroes there. Again, they were grabbing Columbus and all these Spaniards. As soon as they got here, were grabbing and sending them to Castile, to Spain, to Cabo Verde, to Canary Islands, to the Azores. All right, way before 1562. So, lies my teacher told me corresponds to what we were just talking about, which says in 1501 the Portuguese began to depopulate Labrador, transporting the now extinct Botoc Indians to Europe and Cape Verde as slaves. Again, they brought Indians, American Indians, to Cape Verde as slaves from Newfoundland and Canada, or that area they used to call Terra Nova, Labrador. Right? Again, 1501, way before 1562, right? When John Hawkins went to Cape Verde. So, before John Hawkins went to Cape Verde, the Botoc had already been taken, enslaved, and sent to Cape Verde as slaves. Do the research. Again, it says here, Africans and Native Americans by Jack Forrest. Columbus was the major supplier of American slaves prior to 1500. As noted earlier, he caused some 3,000 to perhaps 6,000 slaves to be sent to Europe. And also, if we are to believe that his plans were implemented to the Azores, Canary Islands, Madeira, and Cabo Verde Islands. Again, Cabo Verde Islands, way before John Hawkins. By the year 1500, however, a great escalation began in the shipment of Americans across the Atlantic, since other Spaniards and the Portuguese became directly active. They were enslaving American Indians, the Spanish and Portuguese, and these English were pirating. They were pirating what the Spanish and Portuguese had, which were American Indians. They weren't Africans. In the year 1500, Americans were directly transported to Europe from the Caribbean islands, from the coast of South America,
and from Terra Nova up in Canada. Now, let's get a clear perspective of what I'm trying to explain here, all right? So, the history of Cape Verde, if you go do the research, right, they tell us that it was discovered in the 15th century, in the 1400s, 1456, by Henry the Navigator. You got to read on him, who he was. And it says that when they first arrived, these Europeans, that this place was uninhabited, or as they say here, when these mariners first landed in Cape Verde, the islands were barren of people, but not vegetation. All right, not vegetation. That's important. I'm about to show you something. So, if these islands were uninhabited, then who are these so-called Cape Verdeans that John Hawkins is grabbing by 1562? All right, we already know, right? We've seen all the accounts of all the thousands of Indians that are being brought to Cape Verde, right? All right, so let me show you this now. It says here, before Columbus' time, American cottons were carried across the oceans to parts of the Old World. Historical documents from the Cape Verde Islands show that G. hirsutum, the Mexican species, had apparently reached the Guinea coast of Africa by means of some unrecorded voyage before Columbus' first voyage. Cape Verdean records report that a cotton arrived there from West Africa some 25 years prior to 1492. Remnants of that cotton turned out to have the American triploid genetic structure. All right, so this is native to America, and it was already on that side of the world, in Cape Verde in West Africa, telling you there was people going over there way before Columbus. So was it really uninhabited? We know that the Carthaginians, the Phoenicians, the Greeks tell us that they had colonies in Cape Verde and America. So we know these people were actually from America. All right, this is the true old world. So Cape Verde has been a spot for transatlantic voyage for a long time now. All right, and we know that by 1562, a lot of these people, these so-called Negroes or Cape Verdeans that were there, that John Hawkins kidnapped, were of American origin. Again, this so-called hero, this first slaver from England, right? He was grabbing so-called Negroes from Cape Verde. This was in 1562 in his first voyage, and this is way after American Indians were already being taken to Cape Verde by Spanish and Portuguese, Dutch. All right. If you read this book right here, he tells you these are Negro people. He talks about their diet, how it's better than the other tribes, how they're very civilized people, more than the other tribes in Africa. He gives them certain names. He tells us they use bows and arrows and darts that are different than the other tribes. All right. So now I grew up with Cape Verdeans. So before I knew all this history, I always had a strong connection. You know, they seem more to me like people I would know in Costa Rica or America, not like Africans like from Nigeria or West Africa or, you know, those other countries. All right. They resembled more Americans. And if you see how they look, you're going to see what I'm talking about as well. And if you look at how people in Dominican Republic, Haiti, you know, the Eastern tribes, the Algonquin tribes, if you see how they look, you'll see a lot of resemblances with Cape Verdeans, right? Because Cape Verdeans, again, were mostly American Indians that were being taken over there. All right, so you might know this person right here, Blue Cantrell. You know, famous singer, I believe songwriter as well. And it says here in the bottom that she was born Tiffany Cobb from Providence, Rhode Island, New England. A lot of Cape Verdeans up there. And her father is of Narragansett and Cape Verdean. So he's Narragansett and Cape Verdean. You're going to see that's a trend up in New England. A lot of these tribal people were formerly or have been known to be Cape Verdean as well. And now if you go compare how these Narragansett people look with Cape Verdeans, and I'm not talking about just one person, you know, meet a lot of them, go see how they look, all of them, and go meet Cape Verdeans, you're going to see a lot of resemblances. All right. So here we have Lisa Lopez. I'm sure you all know her. She's from TLC, right? The group, the female group from back in the 90s. TLC Lisa Lopez. It says that she's of Cape Verdean and Portuguese and African American descent. So what does that mean? All right, because Cape Verdeans were colonized by Portuguese. So what are they trying to say here? And then African American, dodge the hijack, right? We crossed that out. Many American Indians by the thousands were taken to Cape Verde. So how do we know she's not one of those descendants? First, all right. So we just went over one of the official transatlantic slave trades. I'm going to show you guys the other official. So remember, there's only two that I've been able to find all these years. And this is the second one. And you're going to see they grabbed them from Cape Verde as well. Okay? They were already bringing American Indians there and Sephardic Jews and Moors from Spain and Portugal, not from Africa. So real quick, we're at the Low Country Digital History Initiative, a digital history project hosted by the Low Country Digital Library at the College of Charleston. They have an article here. It's called The Early Transatlantic Slave Trade. And it says here, from 1501 until 1518, the transatlantic slave trade was comprised of so-called black slaves. That doesn't identify people. You guys know that already, right? Dodge the hijack. Because remember, American Indians were so-called black, and Sephardic Jews and Moors were so-called black. So you got to get more specific. You guys can't let them keep tricking you or confusing you when they throw out statements like this. Black slaves. That doesn't specify who they are. Don't assume African, especially if you're saying transported from Iberia. So it wasn't even from Africa. We're talking about the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, and Portugal, right? They're letting you know, not Africans. Direct slave traffic from Africa was not initially permitted for the same reasons that colonists were repeatedly forbidden from bringing enslaved Muslims and Moriscos to the Americas. The Spanish crown worried that captives from sub-Saharan Africa might introduce non-Christian religious practices to American populations. Though very little is known of the earliest slave trade to the Americas, very little is known because it was in reverse. You see how slick they are, guys, right? We went over all the information. What do you mean very little is known? You're telling me that the Charleston College was not able to find the same sources that I found to prove American Indians were being enslaved and brought to West Africa. Are you telling me this college knows very little of the earliest slave trade to the Americas? That's because there was none. You see how they worded? It was in reverse. The number of slaves transported during these years appears to have been comparatively minimal. There's nobody going over there from Africa, guys. They're letting you know. And so they're going to tell you of one official transatlantic slave trade from a region near West Africa, not mainland Africa, okay? The Guinea Coast, as they call it. So you assume they mean Ghana, Angola, and all these places, right? No. As we saw earlier, when they meant Guinea Coast, they were talking about Cape Verde when it comes to John Hawkins. As Hispaniola's once vibrant native population plummeted from 60,000 in 1508 to less than 20,000 10 years later, it became clear that colonists had to import laborers in order to sustain the colony's gold placer mines and its nascent sugar industry. Remember where they got the sugar industry from? It was coming from these same places, Cape Verde, St. Thomas Island, the Madeiras, in Morocco, Iberian Peninsula. So also, yeah, they did a lot of atrocities to the local population, and they had to bring in more workers. That doesn't mean it was Africans. You got to dodge your own hijacks. Eco and Ovando Spanish colonists and administrators clamored for permission to import African slaves. All right, where's your sources? When did they say they wanted Africans specifically? Show me the primary source where the guys, these Spanish colonists and administrators asked specifically for African. In 1516, even Bartolomé de los Casas, the same Dominican friar who fought tirelessly for the rights of Amerindians, proposed replacing native labor with African slaves, whom he believed were better suited for hard physical labor. Las Casas later recanted this opinion and dedicated a substantial part of his work Historia de las Indias to condemn the African slave trade and Iberian slave markets. Dodge the hijacks. So this right here, all right, I've shown you guys this before. This right here is an official charter or letter from Charles V. All right, Charles V. Before we continue, let's remember who Charles V is and what he looks like. And ladies and gentlemen, this is Charles V, the real Charles V, not no whitewash, fake drawing paintings of him. This is what he actually looked like. So the one on the right over here, we got from a painting. He's right next to the Inca emperors. You guys know it already, where he's listed as Carlos V or Charles V. That's from a real painting hanging in the Larco Museum in Lima, Peru. And these other two images, the one on the left and in the middle, that's him painted in Europe. He's supposed to be the bodyguard of Charles V. But that's all conjecture. I'm going to show you. I got a future video, guys. You're probably not going to believe me, but I know some of my hardcore followers are going to agree with what I'm going to tell you. Guys, I swear I had a video about Charles V being swarthy. This was my thumbnail, and I can't find it on YouTube or my computer anywhere. I know I uploaded this video. I have the thumbnail and everything. But either way, we're going to re-upload it as soon as I redo it again. But I just wanted to make this clear again. We're talking about a so-called black man that's supposedly given a charter to enslave so-called Africans, right? Black on black crime, more on more war. What white man? You got to stop trying to blame the white man for everything. Let's go back. So this is his charter. One thing I want you to notice, guys, is the writing. This is from Charles V's time, Castilian kind of writing. If you guys can see, to me, honestly, it almost looks like Arab. Obviously not exactly, but it's almost got that kind of cursive Arab kind of looking script, because you already know what's up. Remember who ruled the Iberian Peninsula before the Catholics got the power. Now let's read here. What does it say? It says in 1518, Fernando and Isabel's grandson, Emperor Charles V. So if Charles V is a so-called black man, what do you think Fernando and Isabel look like? They weren't white people. And for this one, I'm going to say shout out to Asir the Duke. I watched a video of his. I've shown it. I've shown people the video. He's literally telling you they were black too. That's his lineage. Charles V, that's their grandson. He abolished the provision requiring slaves to be born under Christian dominion and issued a charter allowing 4,000 Africans. Was it really Africans? 4,000. Remember that number, 4,000, to be purchased directly from Portuguese traders in the Cape Verde Islands and transported to the New World. From where? Cape Verde Islands. Okay, 1518. Remember, there was Indians being sent to Cape Verde ever since Columbus arrived in 1492. Remember, we read this already, and there is primary sources stating that. So, who is he really grabbing? It's conjecture to say it was all Africans, just because it's closer to Africa. We know Gorée Island and the Dorne Return in Senegal, which is the closest country to Cape Verde, is fake. We've debunked that. So you can't tell me, oh no, they came from Senegal. No, there is no history of that. There is a history of American Indians being sent to Cape Verde before 1518 and Sephardic Jews and Moors who were fleeing the Inquisition or had been enslaved and sent to Cape Verde to work sugar plantations. So again, he grabbed these so-called Africans from Cape Verde Islands. We already know that was full of Indians and Sephardic Jews. The first slave ships presently known to have sailed with captives directly from Africa to the Americas embarked from the Cape Verde Islands in Sao Tome. They embarked from where? The very first slave ship, presently the only transatlantic or the first transatlantic official slave trade came directly from Cape Verde, not the mainland Africa, not Ghana, not Senegal, not Congo, not the Ivory Coast, none of those places. Stop making things up. History, when you actually research it, tells you something else. Cape Verde Islands and Sao Tome. Sao Tome. Yeah, they're going to say, oh, that was full of Africans. No, it wasn't. Arriving in Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and Cuba during the mid-1520s. All right? Hispaniola, they had to replenish, remember? Replenish with more Indians and Sephardic Jews, not Africans. So real quick, this is just an overview, okay, guys? It says here, history of the Jews in Sao Tome and Principe. It says the history of the Jews in Sao Tome and Principe dates back to the late 1400s, all right? This is before 1518. Remember, they said they grabbed these slaves from Cape Verde and Sao Tome when Portuguese Jews were expelled from Portugal. Who? Portuguese Jews. I'm going to show you what they look like, or what they would describe as looking like.
The Jewish Blackness Thesis Revisited. This is from Ron HaKohen from the Department of Literature, Tel Aviv University. This is from 2018. It says here, the abstract, the notion that in previous centuries Jews were considered to be black or seen as blacks has gained broad acceptance in scholarly discourse on the Jewish body since the early 1990s. The present article considers the notion analytically and then examines some of the evidence provided to support it. Much of this evidence does not stand critical examination. Therefore, arguably, the notion of Jewish blackness should be reconsidered. The notion of the blackness of the Jews or Jewish blackness has become commonplace in scholarly discourse, going back to the path-breaking work of Sandler L. Gilman in the late 1980s. Scholars often assert that a strong European tradition, dating back to the Middle Ages, maintained that the Jews were black, or at least Swarti, and finds sharp expression in modern anti-Semitic literature. All right, so black and Swarti synonymous. That in medieval literature, a theory prevailed in which the Jews were part of the black race, or were at least dark-skinned, or that the general look of the Jew was considered to be like that of the black. The initial formulation is the general consensus of the ethnological literature of the late 19th century was that the Jews were black, or at least Swarti, all right? That was the general consensus. They're letting you know here, all right? Remember that. Jews with Jews. As the essay continues, however, both the weaker term Swarti and the inverted commas or scare quotes are dropped, and the term used is the blackness of the Jew, and not in a metaphoric sense. The Jews were quite literally seen as black. I'm going to read from this book right here real quick, just to corroborate. It says, The Natural History of Man, comprising inquiries into the modifying influence of physical and moral agencies of the different tribes of the human family, by James Cowles Pritchard. All right, and this is volume 1, all the way 1855, and it's about page 131 of this book. It says here, the Jews have assimilated in physical characters to the nations among whom they have long resided, though still to be recognized by some minute peculiarities of physiognomy. In the northern countries of Europe, they are fair or sanctuous. Blue eyes and flaxen hair are seen in English Jews, and in some parts of Germany, the red beards of the Jews are very conspicuous. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. The Jews of Portugal are very dark. Again, the Jews of Portugal are very dark. The Sephardic Jews of Portugal, a lot of these ended up in Holland, the Netherlands, becoming known as Dutch and having influence in the West Indian Company and trade around the world, the ships and everything, and pirates, merchants. Again, these same people we're talking about were very dark-skinned people, so-called Negroes. In 1496, King Manuel I of Portugal punished Portuguese Jews who refused to pay head tax by deporting almost 2,000 Jewish children. All right, children. Jewish, Sephardic Jews, they're supposed to be white, right? They're supposed to be white, huh?
These were black folks, so-called black. And where they ended up, Sao Tome and Principe. The children ranged from age between 2 and 10. Now, 1496, guys, right? 1496. That's 22 years before Charles V said, yeah, go grab some slaves from Sao Tome. And I'm trying to show you guys something here. Hope you guys see it. Who was already there? Hope you guys are really paying attention who they were grabbing from these places. Look at the timelines. Read the history. Again, 2,000 Jewish, that's already half of the slaves right there, just in Saint Thomas. We already know thousands and thousands of American Indians went to Cape Verde. So 4,000 people by 1518, of course, all these people would have multiplied by then. It would be a lot more people. The children were raised as Roman Catholics and worked in the sugar trade. See how they say worked? They don't want to make them slaves, but literally, not worked, they mean were slaves in sugar plantations. They just wording it different, where they had to fend off crocodiles, even being eaten by crocodiles. Didn't they say that about so-called slaves in the South? A year after being deported to the islands, only 600 children remained alive. Conjecture, where's the source? Some of the children tried to retain their Judaism and Jewish heritage until the early 1600s. Descendants of the deported Jewish children retained some Jewish practices by the 18th century. The Jewish heritage on the islands had largely dissipated. That's because they turned them into Africans, guys. They reclassified them. Just like they keep telling us in America, oh, this tribe went extinct. And all of a sudden, it's just Africans, right? African slaves. Even though the plantation is on the land where the indigenous people lived on, but they disappear, right? And all of a sudden you got all these so-called Africans out of nowhere with no sources. It's the same thing, guys, same thing. So again, I just wanted you guys to see this is real. Exploring Sephardic lineages in Sao Tome. Forensic Science International Genetic Supplement. It says here, these islands were probably, they don't know, uninhabited at the time of Portuguese discovery. So if they send in people there and inhabit them with these people, who are the people there, guys? Come on, be logical. If it was uninhabited. After the Portuguese decree of expulsion, many new Christians fled to Sao Tome. So not only as slaves or by force, many people on their own went to Sao Tome. We're talking about Sephardic Jews and Moors. They were fleeing the Inquisitions. So again, by 1518, who are they really grabbing? Be logical. Many new Christians, again, fled to Sao Tome since the Inquisition was never established there. Several documents attest the continuous movement of new Christians to these islands, which worked as a refuge from inquisitional prosecutions. Here it says, making history, the Sephardi Jewish orphans of Sao Tome and the African-American appropriation of their story. The appropriation, huh? They were really Sephardic Jews. They weren't Africans. They're literally telling you, when you call yourself African-American because you think you're a slave from Africa, these people in this particular place that was taken from this particular island were actually mostly Sephardi Jews and Indians. I'm going to tell you of something very logical here, guys. Now, if this island is a refuge for Sephardic Jews and Moors, who the Catholics are going after, and we know Charles V is the Holy Roman Emperor of the Catholic Empire, wouldn't he eventually go after these Sephardic Jews wherever they are, especially if they're increasing in numbers and becoming wealthy and have all these sugar plantations and everything? These people had money as well. They were merchants. They were traders. They were pirates, captains of ships. I'm really trying to show you something very logical here. In 1518, he went after them. He continued to go after Sephardic Jews. And he also knew there was Indians there. So he's like, you want 4,000 so-called Negroes? He's literally telling you they're Negroes. Go to Cape Verde and go to Sao Tome and go ahead and do that. He didn't say go to Africa. He didn't say go to Ghana. He didn't say go to Senegal. He didn't say go to the Congo region, the Ivory Coast, Angola, wherever they lied to us about. He went where he knew they were, and he was trying to destroy that. Again, same places John Hawkins went. So again, I know I'm a little passionate today about this, but I'm just trying to get this through to some people's heads. I just showed you The only two official transatlantic slave trade. There you go. You guys were looking for it. You wanted to prove there was a transatlantic slave trade. Well, here you go. I just helped you out. The only thing is they were grabbing them from Cape Verde Islands. We know that was American Indians and Sephardic Jews and Moors that were there from the Iberian Peninsula, not mainland Africans. So you have been debunked completely. The only two official transatlantic slave trades, and it was with American Indians and Sephardic Jews. Out of all the years I've been doing this, trying to find one slave ship, these two voyages have been the only two I have ever found, and the only two that ever gets mentioned when they're talking about transatlantic slave trade. But the way they always tell it, they generalize, making you think they kept going back and forth to Africa and America and grabbing so many people. There is no other transatlantic slave trade officially from mainland Africa going into the Americas. That is all false. These are the only two. I hope you realize how big this is. And again, Holy Roman Emperor, right? Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, a so-called black man, did that to other so-called Negroes. Right, since we're still talking about this instance right here, where Charles V said, go grab 4,000 so-called Negroes and bring them to the Americas. I give you permission to start doing that. That was part of the Asiento de Negros, it says here, or agreement of blacks, so-called blacks. Was a monopoly contract between the Spanish crown and various merchants. Who's the merchants? For the right to provide so-called Africans, they were from Cape Verde, into the Spanish Americas. The Spanish Empire rarely engaged in transatlantic slave trade directly from Africa itself. Okay, there you go. They rarely did that. It's false. Why are you still believing in that? Why are you still telling me about your DNA test and that your relatives from Kenya, from Congo, and all this other stuff? You're still not understanding. It's not real. I just showed you the only two real ones, and it was from Cape Verde and St. Thomas. So stop making things up, because the Spanish Empire rarely engaged in transatlantic slave trade directly from Africa itself, choosing instead to contract out importation to foreign merchants or pirates. John Hawkins, Francis Drake, and all these. We already know who they were enslaving. We got the drop. Now, regarding what we just read, says here, the young Habsburg, King Charles I of Spain, which is Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, allowed for the direct importation of slaves from Africa. Bosales? Huh? Wait. From Africa, but you're calling them Bosales. Ain't Bosales mixed people? So you're saying that these so-called Africans that they grabbed were actually mixed? They weren't fully Africans? And you got to be logical. They have to throw all this in there. But we know what that mixture is. We're talking about American Indians, Sephardic Jews, Moors, and things like that. Many different Indians, people that the Catholics didn't want. That's who they're talking about. They're literally telling you they're not even full Africans here. Come on. The first asiento for selling slaves was drawn up in August 1518. That's what we just read. Granted a Flemish-ish, right, favorite of Charles Laurent de Gouverneur, a monopoly on importing enslaved Africans for 8 years. So it wasn't right away. 8 years with a maximum of 4,000. He had permission, or they had permission to grab 4,000. And they told you, mainly from Cape Verde. That's where they were breeding them. That's where they had sent them. That's where their slave port was. Yes, Cape Verde was a slave port, but you were told the story in reverse. Gouverneur promptly sold his license to the treasurer of the Casa de la Contratación de Indias, meaning he didn't even use that license. He gave it up. He's like, here, here, you do it. He's selling, and 3 subcontractors, Genoese merchants in Andalusia, Moorish, Sephardic, Jewish, for 25,000 ducats. The Casa de Contratación Civil controlled both trade and immigration to the New World, excluding Jews, conversos, Muslims, and foreigners, unless they had converted and they had become new Christians, and many of them did, and hid that way, and actually were the actual merchants. We already broke this down in so many videos. All these 4,000 slaves, where did it really end up, and with who? The reason I say that is because I'm going to show you a big coincidence. Remember, 4,000 slaves ordered by Charles V? Okay, there's a video I did, guys. And this is the video right here. If you haven't seen it, it's called Benzoni and De La Casa's account of American Indian servitude. You can see it on the top bar here. Orders of Charles V, a swarthy man. Orders of Charles V, huh? American Indian servitude ordered by Charles V. All right, so we're gonna go about minute 25. We're gonna get this video a little bit. Guys, pay attention. It's gonna talk about American Indian slaves. It's gonna tell you how many, and it's going to match 4,000. Pay attention. And it's even going to tell you that they were marked and branded with the letter C for Charles V. All right. Remember, he gave an order to enslave up to 4,000 so-called Negroes, right, that came from Cape Verde and Sao Tome, supposedly. It doesn't mean they grabbed all of them from there, because remember, it wasn't in one voyage. Most of the other ones were probably from the Americas. And in this video, it clearly tells you it was Indians. I'm going to show you. All right, pay attention. We're going to hear this part where I'm reading from this book, Spanish and Portuguese South America During the Colonial Period by Robert Grant Watson. We're going to get an account from Benzoni. He was one of those explorers, conquistadors / slavers that were over there. And he has a primary source. He has an account he made where he saw 4,000 Indians come in, marked with the C on their body, branded by Charles V. Okay, we're going to go to that part right now.
All right, so it says Benzoni, all right, remember the slaver, started for America in the year 1541, and there spent 14 years of toil and travail, landing at the Gulf of Paria. All right, this is in South America, I believe close to Venezuela, or in Venezuela today. He proceeded to Cuba, and other islands, returning thence to Atla. When he crossed to Panama, from which place he visited the kingdom of Peru. The kingdom of Peru.
You knew she was here, so you just had to look at the see the colors here. She got see that butterfly up there. Okay.
Isn't it beautiful?
Now, Everett, she's gonna tell you something. I'm gonna go take the garbage out. She's gonna tell you something.
What?
She's gonna.
The fatalities, the people who have died, are people of African descent. So we wanted to just bring awareness that this testing already exists in Houston. We're not bringing the testing there; it already exists, and we just want to bring awareness so we can get people out. So we thought a good way to do that. The phrase "I did my part" kept coming up because we were like, everybody has to do their part. And so we have teamed up with Procter & Gamble, HEB, Tim Meddy of Matthew 25 Ministries, and together we have put together sort of like a celebration of testing. So if you come and get tested, you get all these free products. They're cleaning products, it's vitamins. That was very important. Cleaning supplies, gloves, masks. And we are treating everyone to a great lunch. They get a voucher to go to one of their favorite restaurants. So we're just trying to encourage people, and I've also encouraged other celebrities to do the same in their city. So Tyler Perry is going to do it in Atlanta, Octavia Spencer in Mississippi. I just challenged Magic Johnson. He's going to do it in Detroit. So we hope that this will become a movement and that it will encourage us to get tested and to find out our status.
Well, it sounds like a real bright spot during what is really a difficult time for all Americans. As you know, several states across the U.S. are beginning to ease coronavirus restrictions, including Texas. I wonder, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm very sad about it because from what I understand, we have another couple of weeks that we could have flattened the curve a lot more. And I'm very afraid for businesses to open because people are still going out without masks and not taking precautions. And, you know, I haven't figured out how I think we could wait a little longer. The essential things are understandable, but getting your hair and makeup and nails and lashes done, I think that could wait. Nails and lashes done, I think that could wait. Nails and lashes done, I think that could wait.